Well, for more insights into that outlook, I sat down with the IMF's Africa Department Director, Abebe Selassie. And we started by looking at Africa's recently ratified free trade agreement and what that means for the continent.
One thing that we haven't had enough of in the region is enough intra-African trade. So we still have, our major trading partners being European countries, China, and the like for most countries. When in much the rest of the world, countries tend to trade more with their neighbors. Okay. Second, the type of goods we export to each other is very different to what we export to Europe. So when we are trading with each other, we tend to export more manufactured goods, more processed goods. When we export to Europe or Asia, it tends to be natural resources, raw materials, commodities. So we're very, very hopeful that once fully implemented, once the tariff barriers are lowered, there will be much more trade within countries, facilitating more manufactured type goods, more services being traded across borders. But it's not a given. Just simply lowering tariffs is not going to be enough, and there are also non-tariff barriers which need to be tackled. There are physical barriers. I mean, not enough connections between countries, not enough infrastructure that connects our countries. So those also have to be addressed going forward. But as an initiative, frankly, it's one of the things that all Africans can be incredibly proud of this year and, well, the last couple of years.
Now, something else that we saw in the report was the difference that we're seeing between growth rates in resource-intensive versus non-resource intensive countries. Why is it important to look at that?
A big factor in that has been that the commodity exporting countries were hit by lower commodity prices, were affected by lower commodity prices, and that, of course, meant lower economic activity for countries and a drag on growth. The non-commodity exporting countries, countries that don't rely to the same extent on oil and metals exports, they have continued to grow at fairly rapid rates. So they, by and large, continue to grow 5.5%, 6% on average over this period. So again, it's really, really important to recognize the tremendous heterogeneity, varied circumstances that prevail in the region, given the very different structures in economies.
And let's also take a look at the importance of human capital, about migration flows in terms of economic growth in Africa. Do you see it as a net positive in terms of sort of remittances from the diaspora, or do you see Africa potentially losing some of its biggest brains with a brain drain as people seek opportunities elsewhere?
As with all flows of capital, flows of labor, flows, it's how you manage these flows. So there are both positive and negative elements to it. So indeed, I mean, if a country is losing a lot of its educated people, its doctors, its nurses, that puts quite a lot of strain on countries, on resources. You're educating these people, and when countries need qualified human capital, so it can be quite a significant brain drain, offset somewhat by the remittance flows that these people may be sending back. At the same time, you don't want to restrict the mobility of labor excessively, right? To the extent possible, you want to allow some of that to happen. So, as with all things economics, I'm sorry to be a two-handed economist, but on the one hand, it's a drain, but also somewhat offset by some of the benefits, as you put it.
You're being a realist, so I certainly can't fault you for that. Obviously, when a lot of people look at Africa, they see this very young population, but as with a lot of other parts of the world, youth unemployment particularly high in some of the biggest economies. You're seeing 25% unemployment in South Africa. You're seeing underemployment as well. How ready is the continent for this young population that's growing and thriving to provide them with opportunities?
Here, I think, what will help the region is the juxtaposition of what's going on in the region with what's happening in the rest of the world. So by 2030, 2035 at the latest, half of the annual increase in the global labor force will be happening in sub-Saharan Africa. This is happening because because there's a lot of young people that are going to be, reaching working age population in Africa, but also in much of the rest of the world, you're going to be seeing a decline in the working age population. This has already started happening in many European countries, in Japan, of course. Yes. But it will be spreading it to more and more countries. So the pool of talent, the pool of labor globally, meaningful supply of labor is going to be available really only in sub-Saharan Africa in abundance. So this juxtaposition should also, I think, help the region. So the sooner we are able to integrate our economies into global supply chains, the benefits will be greater for our region. Of course, this requires tremendous investment in human capital. So, educating the labor force better so they can work, get the jobs of the future will be really, really important. So, I'm extremely hopeful that this dynamism that you see in the region will be an important driver of growth going forward.